Give me a second. It's taking a while. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the Fuse show. Today's topic is data in commercial real estate, exploring the possibilities. And our tagline is, can an industry in flux keep up with the recent acceleration in innovation? Today we have Matt on the show. He's a co-founder of Occupier, a transaction and portfolio management software helping commercial tenants and brokers manage the real estate footprint. He was previously an early stage employee at VTS, a leasing and asset management software provider, and a broker at JLL. Thanks for joining us on the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me, David. Happy to be here.
So Occupier, can you give me an overview of your mission? What led you to build it?
Yeah, so kind of the vision for Occupiers is to bring commercial real estate online. It's an inherently kind of offline paper-based industry. And, if you've been following, the prop tech space for the last, call it 5 to 10 years, there's been a proliferation in technology that's basically trying to bring an old school industry into kind of a new way of doing things. And that's mostly, using web-based software tools. So what led us to starting Occupier was, I got into commercial real estate, 15 years ago or so. And, back then it was probably even more antiquated. So I lived the pain and the struggles of being like a commercial real estate broker in a business that, did not really have good tooling from a tech perspective for people who were trying to build a career. And that actually led me to go work at a prop tech startup at the time. There was a Series A stage company called VTS, and they were tackling a landlord kind of issue, which was owners didn't have a very good understanding of their portfolio, whether it was the tenants that occupied space in their buildings or like their leasing pipeline or what local markets looked like from a rent perspective, from a metrics perspective, and just generally communicating with a multifaceted team to lease out a building or a portfolio of buildings was still a very like manual kind of spreadsheet reporting process. So VTS built a system that allowed landlords and their brokers to essentially collaborate in real time on leasing. And then it kind of, grew from there. But it was through that experience that, I kind of recognized that there was also this opportunity to provide tenants, occupiers of commercial real estate with a similar type of experience, which was most companies out there occupy leases, and it's a major expense for the business. Most of the time, it's the second largest expense of a business. But the question I kept asking myself was like, what tools do they use? Are those modern? Like, do they foster the right collaboration and access to data within a business that is needed to drive kind of that big cost center of a company? Short answer is like, no. A lot of them still just manage their leases on spreadsheets. They communicate with their tenant rep brokers, analog fashion, phone calls, project update, conference calls, spreadsheets, et cetera. So the vision for Occupier kind of formed around tenants should be able to control their real estate decisions in one central kind of command center throughout the entire life cycle of a lease, whether that's like figuring out where to put the next store, or managing all the dates and legal clauses and financials in my existing portfolio, and then finally to like the financial reporting element of like, hey, here's my real estate, this is how I account for it. It complies with financial reporting standards. So it kind of grew from there, but essentially we're looking to bring real estate online for like the demand side of commercial real estate, which is the tenant.
So within commercial real estate, how large would you say your ideal target customer is in terms of either revenue or in terms of properties managed? Or I imagine you know more metrics about that space than I do.
Yeah, we look at our like addressable market as any business out there that occupies a lease or multiple leases. So whether you're like a 5 location sandwich shop chain in like a local market, or you're like Google or Facebook that has like thousands of offices with like hundreds of thousands of employees, the underlying leases of those spaces are financial instruments that you need to take, good care of, or you're either going to pay too much money for certain expenses like rent or operating expenses, or you're going to miss a key date and like forget to renew your lease and get kicked out of your space. Or if you're an expanding company and you're looking to evaluate new sites, like how do you make sense of a market? Like how do you interact with your broker? So like whether you're like a one-off tenant that's just like relocating from like point A to point B, or you're like a massive global company that has like a huge pipeline of transactions, the problem of managing that lease decision is pretty much equal across the size and like the industry of a company. So I mean, we can get into kind of like how the industry is shifting in terms of leasing, but yeah, like for us, it's like once a company starts to get like 5, 6, 7 to 10 leases, then there's just like inherently more potential problems if they don't manage it properly. So we target businesses that are essentially growing or have grown to a point where real estate is something that they need to like constantly monitor, and that's what Occupier allows them to do.
I see. One of the things you mentioned was the fact that this domain in general is using 10-year-old technology, namely spreadsheets and probably even pen and paper at times. So how difficult is it to convince a lot of these companies to shift from a more old school to a more modern solution?
Traditionally, I mean, that's the biggest challenge with prop tech is like trying to get an old school industry to think about new ways of doing things. I think there's a couple of things that are benefiting us as a company and the industry as a whole. Like first, the most obvious thing is like this pandemic and how it's disrupted the way, companies do business in general, right? So if you just focus in on real estate, whether it's retail or office occupiers, they're now faced with these like kind of like, once in a century kind of decisions of like how they're going to like make their company work for the future, right? So that all being said, it's actually kind of easier right now to have discussions with businesses about how they're going to future-proof their real estate, because what they've gone through over the last year has been so painful that it's just like, wow, like we kind of got caught off guard by this pandemic, and our real estate data, the way we were communicating, the financial, legal elements of our leases were not set up properly for something like this to happen. So that is certainly helpful with having discussions about people adopting technology in commercial real estate. I think the other thing that we're benefiting from is just like a generational shift in software, right? Like it's all in the cloud. It's all easy to implement. It's rather easy to rapidly iterate on product. So that allows a company like us to kind of just show kind of constant value in assessing their problems and their needs. So it fosters easier conversations, but you kind of undergirding all of that is, a legacy industry that, if you liken it to like the travel industry before all like, search websites popped up for hotels and airplanes, flights and everything, like people were relying on travel agents. And so there was this like really heavy middleman element to the industry. And I don't think we'll ever get full disruption like that, but I think that's kind of like the main question that the industry is asking itself is like, okay, like what does the future look like in terms of all the stakeholders who are involved in these decisions? So there's a stakeholder management kind of element to it where, you need to convince the brokerage community to use good technology because the tenants are demanding it and vice versa. So there's all sorts of, problems to solve in like the go-to-market with a product like this. But by and large, companies are kind of sick of the old way of doing things, right? Like legacy solutions that don't meet their needs today are easy to unseat.
So what would you say is your biggest pain point in the go-to-market strategy? Is it the conversion of this? Is it trying to convince someone's mind, or is it more so something else?
I think it's a classic enterprise sales problem, which is just aligning value with the pain. Because every business is different. I think that's what's unique about commercial real estate is unlike a company that's going to buy a CRM, like, okay, there's probably 3 or 4 decent options. They have relatively all kind of the same use case. Like I'm a company, I need to sell something and I want to track my prospects and my deals. Real estate is a little bit different because a retailer that's going omni-channel might have a completely different real estate strategy than like a law firm that has 100 offices around the world. So it's really trying to figure out what the unique problems are for the personas that are using the product or going to use the product, and then kind of attaching like a level of pain to that, and then zeroing in on like, okay, like what is the ROI that our product can produce for them, so that it makes it like a no-brainer. Like, oh, if I didn't have this, I would either lose money, lose my job, or have like just like not have an understanding of like the opportunity that I could, extract out of a product like that.
As a percent of your company, how large would you say people who are at least tangentially related to sales compose of your team composition?
We're probably like a 50-50 split between like sales, marketing, and like the product side.
Okay. And where are all these people located?
Right now, because of the pandemic, we're a little bit spread out. And you know what? That's actually an interesting thought, because it's actually allowed us to tap into talent around the country that like we otherwise probably may have avoided or ignored. But when we were founded, two of the co-founders were in New York and two were in Boston. So we always had this kind of like dual city situation. And then as we grew, we kept an office in Boston, we kept an office in New York. And then when the pandemic hit, no one was going into the office anymore. So people were kind of free to like work from wherever they wanted. And then after we've recently raised some money, we've been aggressively hiring, and we've hired people on the West Coast and the Midwest, all over the place. So I think going forward, we'll always try to have some sort of center of gravity in like New York or Boston. But from a company building perspective, we're totally open to people that, can work remote and are comfortable doing that.
I think a lot of companies are benefiting from the fact that as a result of COVID, more people can just work remotely. And as a function of that, you can hire people from effectively anywhere, assuming they have an internet connection and a means of, I guess, working like a laptop. So have you noticed that more people apply to work for Occupier since opening up to remote, or do you feel like you still hire from the same general locations?
I wouldn't say that we've seen like a uptick in like applicants, because we never really said you have to be like in New York or Boston. So
okay.
I mean, we've kind of always been open to it, but I think just in general, with so much churn coming out of the pandemic, and to your point, the idea that all you really need is an internet connection and a desk to work, like, theoretically, there's probably more people that we could reach.
Do you have a specific set of interview questions that you like to ask just to make sure that someone's a good cultural fit for your business?
That's a really good question. Our interview process is half culture, half technical. So like what we like to do is, whether we've gone out and we've kind of like proactively reached out to somebody that we want to work at our company, or whether it's like a referral or an inbound applicant, we'll first have like a culture screen will be like the first call. So whether it's like one of the founders, like myself, or a manager or somebody that would be working closely with that person, we just like to kind of test their intellectual curiosity, like what drives them, talk about like a problem that you solved at your job, or like in generally in life, and like how did you react to the result of that, and like why did you arrive at that type of conclusion, just to get an idea of like how people think, and like are they going to be able to cross departmentally collaborate, do they want ownership of something, or are they comfortable in kind of like a startup environment where there's a lot of unknowns with what they might be doing on a day-to-day basis. And then from there, depending on what the job is, we'll typically have a little deeper dive into like some kind of technical aspects of the job. So if it's an engineer, we're definitely we're doing a test. If it's a product designer, same thing, we'll do a creative session with them. If it's a product manager, we'll give a hypothetical situation. Even if it's a salesperson, we'll give them some sort of like assignment to do to make sure that we know how they can think, how they like process information, how they, can come up with a conclusion to something. And then there's always an element of it that's just kind of gut feel too. So that was a long answer to your short question, but like off the top of my head, I don't know.
Good answer.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know any direct like culture questions. I think, we have, some standard kind of interviewing themes that we kind of will kind of like base, questions off of.
It's probably best it's not direct anyways, because I feel like if you ask it too directly, people kind of know how you want them to answer. Whereas if it's a little more open-ended, you get to actually feel them as a person and figure out what it is that they're going after.
Yeah, and I think this is a lesser kind of understood part of hiring is, especially today where there's a lot of optionality because of the lack of like geographic barriers for people, is as much as we're trying to like screen people to come work at our company, like we're also selling ourselves, like
Right.
why would you want to come work at Occupier? Like,
Right.
so if you kind of came off as this, like, I'm just going to burn down these list of interview questions, like what type of experience would it be like to work with me too? So we try to, put a human element in it from our perspective as well.
So how would you say the people that you interview feel about working with you based on the interview, if you just had to guess?
I think the job, the day-to-day of the job is very much like the interview process itself.
Okay.
Yeah. We try to like bring those people into the company and like make them feel like it would be working with the folks. So like if you're going to interview here, you're probably going to talk with at least 4 to 5 people. Some of them you probably won't even work with on a day-to-day basis. But the feedback that we've gotten from recent hires is that I feel like kind of like I already work here before I even started, or like, it's just generally like a good group of people to get along with. So that's what I hope to hear.
Okay. One of the things you asked or you mentioned earlier in terms of your interview is asking or trying to figure out what motivates someone. So what would you say motivates you?
I think it's kind of just like an incremental growth, personally, in terms of, just experiencing different things that I haven't experienced before. And then kind of that like when you reach that epiphany of like, oh, okay, like I can handle myself in this situation now. I understand what I'm doing. Let's kind of push further into that and figure out like the limits of like what we can do. So I think what motivates me the most is just like the idea of constant improvement and growth. And I think that's what's interesting about startups is, no startup has like a straight linear path of how they get to success. So overcoming those obstacles is very unique to every company. So I think like, personally, it's just seeing like the small wins build up and then, being able to kind of take a break every like quarter or at the end of the year and be like, wow, we accomplished a lot. Like we really did. In the moment, you kind of feel like it's just this whirlwind of stuff that's going on, but kind of that personal growth and the company growth, I think, is kind of what drives me.
Okay. So what is it, as a related question, what does it take for you to feel accomplished at the end of the day?
That's a good question. Today, it's a little weird because I work out of my bedroom pretty much.
I feel accomplished sometimes when I work out of my bedroom.
yeah, it doesn't really matter where you're working, as long as, I look at it as the way I approach a day is like, what are the 2 or 3 big things that I know that I need to get done today? If I get all 3 of them done, like I feel great. If I procrastinate on something and I let something slip and it's eating at me in the back of my mind, I don't feel like I had a great day because I didn't accomplish, that big goal. Yeah, I may have gotten a bunch of other smaller things done or, been distracted by something like, the family or home or something. So that, that doesn't feel that great. And I think that's a reason why there's always going to be a future for the office. But yeah, I feel, and there's also like a team element to it. Even if I didn't really get everything done that I felt like I wanted to get done that day, if I can go on Slack and see that, hey, we closed a couple of deals, our salespeople brought a bunch of stuff into the pipeline, we got a really good referral from a customer or something like that, even though I may not have, crushed my day, like there was still positive momentum at the company. So, there's always a positive you could find out of it. And I think if you're always dwelling on the negative, then that's, you could slip down the wrong path pretty easily.
Do you feel more productive working from home or do you feel more productive working in an office setting?
Hands down, the office.
Okay.
most people that work from home prior to the pandemic probably didn't have their kids around all the time because they were at school or daycare or whatever. But
Sure. Yeah.
the reality of it is now, like, your kids are probably doing school on Zoom half the time, which means they're home. There's distractions. But even if like I didn't have kids at home, I would still feel more productive in an office. Like I'm kind of a creature of habit. I like to get up, get my morning routine in, get to the office, have some work time before you get on calls and stuff like that. So, and I just think it's like more mentally healthy to have that separation, so that like when I leave work, I know like, okay, like I can put this aside for at least a few hours before I need to deal with it again.
Speaking of separation, something I noticed on your website was that you offered unlimited PTO. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how much time would you take off on a typical year?
I don't know. I would probably say like I'll take like 2 to 3 like solid weeks off where I'm like checked out, at least like not logging into my computer and like not getting on calls. I think there's always like some ambient awareness of what's going on. Like you have your phone, you have Slack on your phone. It's kind of hard to ignore. But yeah, I mean, and yeah, I think on average, maybe like 3 weeks of vacation is like where I would kind of like land. And with having kids, it's kind of aligns with like their vacation schedules and stuff like that.
Is that 3 weeks of continuous vacation or like 1 week, 1 week, 1 week, or like a bunch of 1 day, 1 day, 1 day type of thing?
Yeah, it's probably like, it's definitely not 3 weeks off straight. It's more like probably 2 full weeks where you're checked out, and then like a couple of like, compile in a few like long weekends or days here where it's just like, oh, I'm going to take a day off because my kids are off and we're going to go do something.
So what do you, sorry, what do you do before you take vacation to make you feel as confident that things will go well while you're on vacation?
Make sure that there's no big projects that like require my attention that I haven't either like finished or assigned or like delegated to somebody else. Like I think that's the great thing about having really kind of capable co-founders is, like we know we got to get done what we got to get done, and as long as the team is aware of what I'm working on and the the external stakeholders that I might be dealing with are aware that I'm leaving, like, I mean, look, work's always going to be there. So I don't think like if there was something that was like, oh, we're going to like, this company's going to burn down if I leave right now, then, maybe you have to kind of work over vacation. But I've never really been in a situation where it's like, hey, hon, I really can't come on the vacation. I have to deal with this huge company issue.
I see. And how do you choose to divide the split of responsibilities between you and your co-founders? Sorry.
Yeah, it's really just like, what does the business need? So like we look at all the different kind of functions within our company, whether it's marketing, sales, customer success, product development, engineering, recruiting, managing employees. So we kind of look at it like in those buckets, and we're finally to the point now where we're actually able to hire leaders to run those different disciplines, which is awesome. So we'll start to be able to kind of step back, not like we'd ever step back, but then be able to kind of use more of our time from a strategic and kind of like brand development and business development perspective. But Andrew and myself both come from pretty hardcore sales backgrounds, so we're both very involved in like the sales side of things. We just hired an awesome marketing person, Morgan. She's going to take over pretty much all kind of the go-to-market in terms of our marketing efforts. Prior to her being there, it was me, and I didn't really have like a disciplined experience in marketing. But somebody needed to own it, right? Like you can't have a company and not have a brand or have a voice out there or have a website. So it's really like, it's pretty down and dirty startup stuff. Like, okay, like who wants to own this? Like you might not be an expert in it, but someone's got to own it. So that's kind of how we look at it.
So one of the things you mentioned was leadership. So how do you define a leader, and what do you look for in leadership hires at your company?
It's a really good question. I think like to define leadership, I think the there's two elements to it. One is trust. I think the people that work for a leader must trust that leader. It might manifest in like difficult conversations, whether they're like feedback sessions or whatever, but as long as you trust me and that you know that like I'm looking out for your best interests and I want you to grow as a person, then I think that's probably the most I think that's the most coveted aspect of a leader from like the employee's point of view. And I also think kind of like along with trust comes with like ownership and agency. So if somebody's going to come into the business, like we want them to own their career, their function, their role. That doesn't mean they can go off and just like rogue, do whatever they want. But you know, like you bring in somebody to run marketing, it's like, okay, like you own this aspect of the business. You're gonna have support from the founders and other people in the business to like help you make decisions or like, you know, approve certain things. But you know, we want you to be the kind of the face of the franchise for the marketing group, for example. So yeah, I mean, giving people the keys to their own career, and then allowing them to trust you that you know you're always kind of looking out for their best interest.
Do you ever feel nervous giving the keys to a subset of your kingdom?
No, because I think back to like our interview process, like obviously you don't have 100% certainty of like who's going to come into the company and how they're going to act like when they're here. But, you know, if we've done our job with vetting and like we've had different people in the business with different points of view kind of all kind of coalesce around a candidate, like we're pretty confident that person can come in and teach us something. So if you don't hand the keys over, then you're never gonna unlock the success that person might be able to bring to the company. And look, like there's probably only so much damage somebody could do before you kind of figure out like, okay, this isn't the right fit or this was the wrong move. So you can course correct as you go. But you know, our philosophy is like, we're bringing somebody into the company, you got to give them a shot. And, you know, if you don't, then they might get, you know, kind of disgruntled at the end of the day because you're not given the opportunities for growth. So I think that risk reward is more, you know, it's calculated, and you could always kind of, like I said, course correct if things go the wrong direction.
Are there anything you've learned in the process of hiring that you wish you knew in the past?
It's a good question. Yeah, I would say like you got to be diligent about stuff. You can't make assumptions that people want the job at your company, especially when you're a startup. Like you have to be aggressive with going after and getting people.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think I've learned that like if there's a role that you need to fill at a startup, like it's pretty urgent. Like you're only hiring that person because you've gotten to a point where you like extremely need it, right? And so from that perspective, I think yeah, it's just like urgency and speed and like decisiveness about like, okay, like we have conviction around this person, like let's get it done so we don't drag this process off any further, because that is like a pretty big time commitment for the entire team to be constantly evaluating talent. I think the other thing is like, it's really tempting to kind of like want to hire people that you already know. You know, there might be some gems in there, people that you're like, I know this person's just like a machine. Let's get them in, and you know, we're not going to have any culture issues. We're not going to have any problem with you know, false expectations. But at the same time, like, you know, you do get hit up a lot of times by people that you know, where it's just like, oh, you know, like I like you as a friend or like a person,
Right.
but you know, might not be the right fit for what we're doing, and like trying to shoehorn a role in for somebody that like, you know, is a friendly is, you know, I think that's dangerous.
I see. Is there any time have you ever gone against your gut feeling and then later ended up regretting it?
Oh, isn't that the story of life? Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's been whether it's people or whether it's just like decisions. Yeah, like I think when you're really early on, you're just trying to, you know, make incremental progress and, you know, grow in every way you possibly can. So that might force your hand to make decisions that you otherwise wouldn't. either with hindsight or with more, wins under your belt. So yeah, like no specific examples, but there's definitely things like looking back, you're like, oh, like we probably could have saved 6 months if we hadn't done that.
Let's talk about that. What was the specific thing that you felt you could have saved 6 months if you didn't spend too much time into?
Yeah, I don't really have a specific example there, but
Okay.
like, you could use like your go-to-market strategy as like a subscription-based like SaaS company, for example. Like, it's not like I felt like we've failed or anything, but like, could we have started sooner on inbound marketing? Like if we decided rather than hire, inside sales reps, if we just like dumped all of our money into like website optimization and keyword optimization and content and just building out like a huge marketing funnel first, would that have changed the trajectory of our business rather than going the kind of outbound sales rep route, which by the way has been successful, but it's like, these are things where you're kind of just, you have to make a call, right? So, our philosophy has always been like, prove that you can sell the product before you go out there and like market the product really hard, wider audience. So I don't have a specific there, like, oh, like that cost us like $500,000, but the point is, could there always been different decisions made? Yes.
My thoughts on the multiple channels is that you just really have to experiment. You really don't know which channel is going to work out best for your business until you just give it a shot.
Yeah, 100% agree. And once you start getting traction and you start seeing the unit economics work, you're like, okay, well, let's double down on that. And then like once you have a little bit more of, financial flexibility, you could then start testing other channels. Yeah, I 100% agree.
As of, I guess, 2021 for Occupier, which do you find to be the most effective channel?
As of today, it's really just been like outbound sales engagement. So, we have some awesome sales reps that, because we're a startup, they have to do a little bit of their own outbound prospecting at the same time as like manage deals and close deals. And I would say that has been the most effective like route for us is, like I said earlier about the real estate industry, it's pretty old school. Like it's very unlikely that, a real estate decision maker is just going to like sign up for your software online without really putting you through like a pretty extensive evaluation. So, we still get in, we get into the procurement funnel of a company, and like you got to be a pretty experienced salesperson to deal with all of that information gathering, all that objection handling. So I think it's been beneficial for us to know that we've built that sales engine now that we could use as like our foundation. But second half of 2021, we're going to be ramping up our kind of like inbound strategy. We're going to be doing a full kind of like website revamp and, starting to try to capture leads that are out there like looking for our software.
Do you, so I noticed that you had a podcast on your website. I noticed that it's most companies don't have a podcast. So what inspired you to go down the path of creating a podcast?
You know how hard it is to get like customer testimonials and get people talking about your product, like without, like it's a difficult thing to do, right? Because you're trying to service this customer. As a startup, the product is always like not 100% exactly doing what they want it to do. So you're trying to maintain like a good cadence in relationship with your customers so they don't churn and that they're getting successful on your software. And then all of a sudden, like you need them to like act as a reference. And then all of a sudden you want to ask them to like give a testimonial for your website or for like a case study or something like that. You're just asking a lot of the people that are like helping you build your business. So we just felt like from both a branding perspective and having just like awareness of what Occupier is through that medium, as well as inviting people in to a conversation that are either in our orbit. They might be a direct customer. They could be like a VC in our space. They could be somebody that, can speak to their experience with our product or experience with the problems that we're solving. We felt like that would just generate like an awesome kind of library of content to like repurpose and be able to use like for marketing purposes. So yeah, like it's kind of in playing the long game too, right? Like we're not trying to like become the next, hit podcast out there like Joe Rogan or something like that. We're just trying to, be different than like everybody else out there in our space.
I like what you said, the long game. I think the long game is one of those things that really separates the businesses that succeed and those that don't. When you think about the long game, what are some things that you feel like you're doing right now to help build towards that?
Well, from a product perspective, we're building tools that, have never really been used widely in our industry. So like, as we mentioned before, commercial real estate is such like a, paper-based, email-based, document-based communication realm, that the tooling for how data moves around between parties has never really been fully built out. Like, you may have old school lease administration systems that sit there as a database to contain your lease data. You might have old school accounting systems that are there used by the FP&A group to like close out their books every quarter. But like, those people had to like chase down a ton of information to get to their end result of like what they were doing, when that information was being injected into the company like years before. So like, why isn't there a place where the broker, the planner, the architect, the attorney, the real estate team can understand like that real estate data from its earliest stages, and that data just kind of moves through a life cycle in one piece of software rather than being kind of like taped together from all these different sources? So in order for us to like really build out the way we want the product to go, like, we have to solve some of these user problems and add value and make their lives easier. So like, essentially just like taking work off their plate and building it into software. So the long game is like, we want to build workflow software for every constituent in like the commercial real estate side for occupiers. But like, the next step of that is now we have this amazing source of data in our platform that we can start to do cool things with, whether it's provide cool analytics dashboards to the customers themselves, market intelligence that might help them understand like, how is the market behaving more broadly across all of the companies that use Occupier. There might be third-party integrations that are really interesting to companies. So for example, if I'm a retailer and I'm looking at like locating certain, sites in certain locations, I might be able to integrate that in with some sort of demographic data or sales data from my existing same stores, so that I could look at like data within a real estate lens that contains really non-real estate type of data. Or if I'm like, if I'm like Google or something and I have a huge kind of workplace practice and I want to like integrate HR data with my real estate data and visualize that so that I could automate decisions and like make more targeted bets. Those are all kind of things that probably won't be able to happen until you kind of get all of these users using the software and getting value out of it. So the long game is more around like, what can we do with this data? But the short game is, look, people just need better tools to do their job.
So you mentioned a lot of use cases. Did you know about all those use cases before you start Occupier, or did you do a lot of user interviews to discover them?
Both. So like my background is mostly in like office leasing. So I was very intimately aware of pretty much like every decision point, every step of like leasing office space for a tenant, whether it's like measuring how much space they need, figuring out the proper office layout, which then would result in how much square footage they need, understanding how to evaluate a market, come up with options that work for them, negotiate with landlords, understand market economics so that you could drive them towards the right decision. And then, all the legal ramifications of what you negotiate in a lease. So that was like where my most expertise was. But if you kind of templatize like a commercial lease, it can go from industrial to biotech to retail. Now there's obviously different, rent structures and different kind of business models in both of those, in all of those different sectors. But by and large, they're all kind of operating the same. As like, I need space, I need to figure out how to get it, I need to be able to manage that lease once it's done. So, as we expand our product capabilities, we'll be able to actually provide like more specific catered solutions towards those different sectors. So if I'm a retailer and I'm coming out of COVID and all of a sudden landlords don't want to sign traditional leases with tenants because they're kind of like, afraid if they're going to be in business, they might they might enter into more kind of straight like percentage rent type of deals that have to, comply with a different financial, analysis structure. So we might build something that's more catered towards that sector. So yeah, like from a vision perspective, we always kind of knew that like all of these different types of stakeholders would benefit from the same software. But that just obviously prevents more kind of user conversations, customer conversations to figure out like, what is the ideal solution for each one of these types of users.
So I have two more final questions. What advice would you give to founders or soon to be founders who are watching this show?
I would say try to gestate your idea as far as you can before like you go in full time, and that's not to like hold people back from, like is now the right time. It's more around like, hey, if you have a full-time paying job and you can still make progress on your startup at night, you're just saving money, or you're not giving away a piece of your company to an investor. So like I think if you could get a product along, try to even get paying customers before you go out and say, like this is something that I want to raise money for. And by the way, like not every startup has to raise money. Some make money day one because the product is sticky or has a different type of go to market. So, I only have experience in kind of the SaaS subscription based model. But I think what was helpful for us as we started was we got our first customer before we had a product based on like mock-ups. So we knew what the problem was. We knew where the people were that potentially had that problem. So if you could speak to the problem of the user before you have a product, A, it will help you like kind of seed that person as a potential customer, and B, it'll uncover, holes in your thinking so that you could say, oh, wow, I didn't actually understand that part of it. Let me go back and put that into the product, like wireframe or whatever. So I would say try to gain as much traction as you can, doing it like as a side project or like nights and weekends before you're like quit your job. That's what I would do.
Okay. And last question. What's the best way for our viewers to get in touch with you?
Good question. So, our website's occupier.com. If you're an actual potential user of our product, you could request a demo. You could find our LinkedIn page. Just go on LinkedIn, search for Occupier. You'll see all of our employees. You'll see all of our products. You'll understand kind of the kind of the sales pitch of our company. You can find me. I'm on Twitter at Matt Giffune, and you can listen to the podcast. So if you go on iTunes or Spotify or whatever, just search for Fully Occupied, and we release one of those probably every like 2 or 3 weeks.
Sounds good, and we'll include those links in the page for this video. Thanks for your time today, Matt, and I hope we all enjoy the show.
Thanks, David. Appreciate you having me on.